I'm in a funk and I need to get back on my feet, so we're shooting fish in a barrel now. Sue me.
Members of the graduating class, you who are about to receive your diploma should also receive an apology from this university and a refund of a large portion of the tuition you have paid. You have been cheated, bilked, propagandized, and badly educated.
You probably think you're an individual with unique experiences, thoughts, and ambitions. Well, I hate to break it to you.
I hate clean air and water.
When people describe particularly evil individuals or regimes, why is it that they use the terms Nazi or fascist, but almost never communist? Given the unparalleled amount of human suffering communists have caused, why is communist so much less a term of revulsion than Nazi?
I can already feel a brain hemorrhage coming on. So the answer to why are people more afraid of Nazis than communists is pretty simple. Adolf Hitler wrote a book called Mein Kampf where he said he thinks the Germanic peoples should kill or enslave everyone in Eastern Europe. And then when he became Chancellor of Germany, he tried to kill or enslave everyone in Eastern Europe. And that's kind of unique, believe it or not. You can make the case that capitalism or communism or even other non-Nazi forms of fascism inevitably lead to mass violence. But only Nazism starts with the premise, everyone else should be my slave or die. So it's just natural that people are more repulsed by people who just openly want to kill everyone and own slaves versus people who are just tragically wrong about policy.
Communists killed 70 million people in China, more than 20 million people in the Soviet Union, not including about 5 million Ukrainians, and almost 1 out of every 3 Cambodians.
Everyone knows that. It's 1 in 4. Everyone knows that. Why? What? Who do you imagine is going to hear only 1 in 4 Cambodians died and think, oh, that's not so bad? In fact, all of these numbers are fake. Not just fake, but different from the numbers PragerU presents on its source page. Like, look, it's right on the website. Look, it's right there. It's right. But this is bait, right? I'm taking the bait. They're not lying because they're sloppy. They're lying because it's impossible not to look like an asshole when you say, well, actually, Stalin only killed 8 million people, so it's not so bad. Well, too late now. Might as well get the numbers right. Now, Hitler did kill 5.5 to 6 million Jews. But on top of that, he also killed about 2 million non-Jewish Poles. Starved a million civilians to death in Leningrad, killed millions of villagers in reprisal killings all throughout the occupied territories, starved 3 million prisoners of war to death, plus gassed hundreds of thousands of Roma, disabled Germans, and political prisoners to add up to about 17 million. Plus, he started a war that killed an additional 13 million Soviets, an additional million Poles, a million Yugoslavs, 500,000 Greeks, Italians, Hungarians, Romanians, French, and Brits, 300,000 Czechs, 200,000 Dutch, 100,000 Americans, and of course, 6 million of his own precious Aryan Germans, coming in at about 40 million dead. But remember, Hitler's vision was cut short by the fact that he lost the war. His actual plans to depopulate Eastern Europe would have involved, by his own calculation, about another 100 million deaths over the next 10 years. Stalin, despite being in charge of a country more populous for a substantially longer period of time, only managed to kill 3.5 million in the Ukrainian famine, 1.5 million in the Kazakh famine, a bit less than 1 million in the Great Purge, and another 1 million and change in the gulags, adding up with wartime atrocities to between 8 and 9 million. Stalin didn't just kill fewer people than Hitler, he killed fewer Ukrainians than Hitler. So the real reason people don't consider communism worse than Nazism is that it does not in fact kill more people. Nazism's just been in power for less time in fewer places. So how did these 2 stupid fake numbers become the canonical numbers that only a communism apologist would deny, despite the fact that there's barely a historian left who would stand by them? As you might imagine, it begins with the Cold War. For most of the Cold War, the most popular histories of Stalinism were The Great Terror by Robert Conquest and Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Those books, by necessity, had to rely on a lot of guesswork. Basically, a combination of extrapolating from eyewitness accounts and looking at shortfalls and anomalies in the census data. And so 20 million became the canonical number. But then, the Berlin Wall fell, and suddenly historians got access to the actual government documents, and the result was a big downward revision of deaths. But just as historians were doing that work, another book dropped that would overshadow all that real history. The Black Book of Communism. This book was made up of essays from real, credible historians, but it was compiled by a guy named Stéphane Courtois, and he had an axe to grind. And so secretly, behind the rest of the writers' backs, he wrote an intro that randomly grabbed the most high estimate for every type of death that could plausibly be attributed to a policy of a government that could plausibly be called communist, all with the goal of hitting 100 million casualties. And by really stretching, he was finally able to get to 93 million. The problem with the book isn't just that these numbers were exaggerated, it's that they openly contradicted the numbers given a few pages later in the same book. But it was too good a marketing ploy to give up, and because no one reads past the first few chapters of any book, no one was any the wiser. And conservatives gobbled this up because the shock and awe of the big numbers meant you could just sort of bulldoze through any sort of argument about what policies work and what policies will kill a bajillion people.
67 million people dead.
Like you're saying, 100 million people have died to Marxist ideology, and that's a really serious number.
38 million to 45 million, depending on the estimate.
You put up the Courtois book, the Black Book of Communism, 20 million people. That's a conservative figure. Stalin alone annihilated 60 to 70 million people.
But so far, popular culture just hasn't gone along. Nazis are still scarier than communists. And Dennis here has some ideas about what's responsible, or rather, who's responsible.
And since the left dominates academia, almost no one teaches communism's evil history.
So while we're starting off here with the usual argle-bargle about left-wing professors, the video gets increasingly weird. First, it blames the victims.
Germans have thoroughly exposed the evils of Nazism, have taken responsibility for them, and have attempted to atone for them. Russians have not done anything similar regarding Lenin's or Stalin's horrors. Even less so has China exposed the greatest mass murderer and enslaver of them all, Mao Zedong. Mao remains revered in China. Every Chinese currency note has his picture on it.
Oh man, imagine having a genocidal monster on your currency. Imagine a society that would put such a person on the money. It's clearly sick and in denial about its own history and past crimes. Truly a reckoning is needed.
Until Russia and China and Vietnam and Cuba and North Korea acknowledge the evils their countries committed under communism, communism's evils will remain less known than the evils of the German state under Hitler.
Maybe the Chinese should start a protest movement. Call it Black Category Lives Matter. I promise that one day I will learn to write a joke that more than 3 people will get. I promise. But then Dennis blames Vietnam War protesters?
In the view of the left, the last good war was World War II, the war against German Nazism and Japanese fascism. The left does not regard wars against communist regimes as good wars. For example, the American war against Vietnamese communism is regarded as immoral, and the war against Korean communism and its Chinese communist backers is simply ignored.
Is that why people remember World War II as the good war? Are you sure it's not, because we won?
Communists murdered mostly their own people. The Nazis, on the other hand, killed very few fellow Germans. World opinion, that largely meaningless and amoral term, deems the murder of members of one's own group far less noteworthy than the murder of outsiders. That's why, for example, blacks killing millions of fellow blacks in Africa elicits almost no attention from world opinion.
This frame is where I knew I had to make the video. It's so rich, so dense with dumb premises, it's a masterpiece of nonsense. First off, who is world opinion?
World opinion, that largely meaningless and amoral term.
So no one? No one. Great. Okay. We're just arguing with imaginary people. Second, it's not enough that conservatives are using black-on-black crime as a tool to shut down discussions of racism. Now they're taking it global. You say you care about racism, but where were you during the Rwandan genocide? Checkmate, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Third, he couldn't even think of a specific event, just blacks killing blacks.
Blacks killing millions of fellow blacks in Africa?
That's how you know he cares. Dennis, Africa is not a country. If one country attacks another in Africa, that's still an international conflict. It's 2021. You can't just put everyone in a big box labeled the blacks.
Blacks killing millions of fellow blacks in Africa?
And these people think it's a media conspiracy that everyone thinks they're racist. But you know, maybe the problem here is a little closer to home than world opinion, because there's someone else who also thinks crimes committed against one's own people aren't that bad. Here, for instance, is one of Dennis Prager's own proteges.
When you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to...
This clip of conservative activist Candace Owens got her into a lot of trouble. In fact, she even had to answer for it in a congressional hearing.
First thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist.
I work for Prager University, which is run by an Orthodox Jew. Not a single Democrat showed up to the embassy opening in Jerusalem. I sat on a plane for 18 hours to make sure that I was there. I'm deeply offended by the insinuation of revealing that clip.
But I don't think Owens came up with that idea on her own, because a few weeks before she said it, this video popped up on PragerU.
But it wasn't long ago that great political figures, such as Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, David Ben-Gurion and Mahatma Gandhi, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, recognized what I call the virtue of nationalism. Many now seek comfort in a simplistic narrative, ceaselessly repeated, that nationalism caused 2 world wars and the Holocaust. But this is one of the great untruths of our time. Adolf Hitler was no nationalist. He was an imperialist. If his ambitions had been limited to ruling Germans, it would have been terrible for Germany. But the French, the British, the Russians, and everyone else would have been spared a world war.
Compelling argument. Old nationalism was imperialistic, but not us. Not new conservative nationalism. We promise. Except for one thing. PragerU also thinks imperialism is good.
If you love America, you should also love the power that gave us our sense of inalienable rights. It all started in America with the British Empire, a great liberty-loving empire. Freedom was an Englishman's right, and wherever he went, he took that right with him. The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest administration, and they insisted that basic moral standards were honored.
Basic moral standards, huh?
Should we issue a warning, sir? They've had their warning.
They were more than content to leave people alone, to let them be themselves, to govern them with the lightest possible hand.
So this all begs the question, what the hell does PragerU think Nazism is?
Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well. Okay, fine.
So you might be asking, why does this video exist? Because it doesn't need to. I mean, there's something quaint about PragerU bringing back the false equivalence between Nazism and communism. 10 years after Glenn Beck with his chalkboard on Fox News proved that Nazism, communism, progressivism, Woodrow Wilson, the Frankfurt School, and Medicaid expansion were all the same thing.
One had the hammer and sickle, the other was a swastika. But on each banner read the words here in America of this: social justice.
A category to which we can now add bans on library rap and genderqueer potato toys. Why worry about whether Nazis are better or worse than communists when you've already convinced your audience that the Nazis are left-wing? And in fact, Dennis basically refutes the premise of his video right in the middle of it.
Nothing matches the Holocaust for pure evil. The rounding up of virtually every Jewish man, woman, child, and baby on the European continent and sending them to die is unprecedented and unparalleled.
So what's going on here? It might just be about fostering mistrust. All conservative media is about fostering mistrust of institutions, to atomize people as much as possible. So this video may just be another way to convince people you can't trust mainstream history, in addition to the rest of academia and media. But PragerU also doesn't offer alternatives. When have you ever seen a call to action in a PragerU video? You know, write your congressman, boycott this product, protest. Basically never. There are no alternatives. Think about what those two ideas combine to say. Everyone who runs the world is corrupt and evil and specifically out to get you, but don't worry about it.
By all means, enjoy television. I do. But remember, the people making TV don't merely want to entertain you. They want to influence you.
TV is evil liberal propaganda, but you can keep watching it. I think this Nazi video is the key to breaking the paradox. Because according to this video, intentions of elites don't matter. In fact, good intentions may be worse than bad intentions.
Communism is based on nice-sounding theories. Nazism isn't. It's based on heinous-sounding theories. Intellectuals in general, including, of course, the intellectuals who write history, are seduced by words, so much so that they deem actions as less significant than words. For that reason, they haven't focused nearly as much attention on the horrific actions of communists as they have on the horrific actions of the Nazis.
The selfish Nazis killed fewer people than the utopian communists, right? So if the leader of your country is an amoral crook, consider yourself lucky. And then PragerU goes a step further, because you also can't trust yourself. You certainly can't trust your feelings, because feelings are, of course, feminine and irrational. But then PragerU says you can't trust reason either.
Human reason, when cut loose from the constraints imposed by history, tradition, and experience, produces a lot of crazy notions. The abstract Enlightenment philosophy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, it quickly pulled down the French state, leading to the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and the Napoleonic Wars. Millions died. Karl Marx saw himself as promoting universal reason as well. His new science of economics ended up killing tens of millions of people in the 20th century. So did the supposedly scientific race theories of the Nazis.
You can't trust elites. You can't trust the people. You can't trust your emotions. You can't even trust yourself as a rational being. What does that leave? Just obedience, I guess. So am I making some grand point about how the conservative movement has reached a new dystopian turning point, where it's abandoned even its contingent principles of limited government and individualism, and has instead embraced a valueless form of post-ideological power worship? No, actually. Remember, these videos are for kids, and not for kids to watch voluntarily. They're for authority figures like parents or uncles to foist on kids. They're tools for demoralizing kids into giving up. A sort of passive-aggressive emotional abuse. And what do these authority figures want from their wards? They want them to shut up.
You're the problem. Don't waste time asking how you know that what you're doing is wrong. Inopportune questioning can confuse without enlightening.
Shut up.
These are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings.
Shut the fuck up.
The moment you graduate, reality is gonna hit you like a truck.
Shut up, shut up.
Stop thinking about it, period.
Fortunately, this strikes me as a little too heavy-handed to work. Hey, thank you guys so much for your patience. I had a lot on my plate recently, and then in the middle of editing this one, I got COVID. So I just thank you guys for sticking in there. And now I'd like to thank my patrons. Kitten of the Yarn Persuasion, Deanna Banana, Big Nove, Fog Chitin, Kimma Berry, Tedsville, Jason Yance, Knowing Better, Zach Christensen, Scott Beckett, Gabo Sai, As Anonymous as Possible, Joel Gomez, Fold Out Chair, Sir S, B. Quinn, and Carl Nyo.